This podcast and all our resources from Lorehaven.com focus on readers. That is by design, and that's also why when we get questions from aspiring writers like, where can I find an agent? Or will you look at my unpublished manuscript? Well, we don't really have much to share with them in that department until now. We are journeying into new lands in 2026, and this month we are launching the Lorehaven Authorship within the Lorehaven Guild on our Discord server. Today, let's explore how these new digital channels and pro live streams and the fan-focused book festival will help authors cultivate their God-given creative purpose.
Speculative fiction, like no other genre, reflects the creativity of God.
If you look at the scriptures, you're going to have to see that God uses imagination more than rational discourse.
We are supposed to be image bearers for a vastly creative God.
Reading fantastical fiction opened a portal in my imagination for a place other than just a materialistic world.
I experienced the gospel story with the mind of someone who loved adventure and loved the idea of light conquering darkness.
We're wired for stories that reflect how we see the world in ways that are true.
The story is either pointing to Christ or it's pointing to our need for Christ.
Fans, creators, countrymen, lend me your ears. This is Fantastical Truth, the podcast from Lorehaven.com, where our mission is to help you escape bad books and find the best Christian-made fantasy and sci-fi for the glory of Christ. I'm Stephen Burnett. I've published Lorehaven.com since 2018, actually. I'm also now a science fiction author myself, with Above the Circle of Earth having launched last year from Enclave Publishing.
And I'm Zackary Russell, and I am currently in submissions. And no, I don't mean like a UFC type thing. I mean, my manuscript has been submitted to a couple of publishers and a literary agent, and I'll tell you more about that in a minute. This is episode 296. How will the Lorehaven Authorship help you grow your creative gifts for Christ's glory?
Immediately a difference becomes apparent between Zack and I, because my philosophy about this is to handle all the authorial stuff deep backstage. I've never been really open source about that. And not just because sometimes publishers will say, hey, we don't want you talking about this yet, we're going to do a big announcement rollout, but because maybe I've seen a lot of those behind the scenes videos for magicians and movie makers, and it always seems more magical for the movie, the magic act, whatever, just to come out fully developed, all put together by the hands of skilled artisans, and then maybe afterwards you find out how they did it. At least that's how I think of it, but others have different approaches.
Well, you know, I've actually followed pretty well a rule for however many years I've been writing fiction now, which is to really just not talk about it publicly too much, because you get the same dopamine rush from getting cheered on for, you know, posting your writer progress that you get from actually publishing something and having people read it, which is also why social media is such a horrible, nasty trap for a lot of us writers.
It's a trap.
Yeah. So I am making an exception to that rule today for this podcast episode.
That's right, because we're talking about the authorship. And Zack, you know me, that this takes some practice for me to talk about authorial stuff, because I don't know if it's because of just hyperfixation or what, but when I decided a few years ago, hey, whatever I do with a website before Lorehaven and now with this Lorehaven mission, I want to focus specifically on fans, because there's already plenty of groups talking about writers and the craft of writing in the industry, and whether or not you should go trad versus indie, and how to get an agent, and how to vary your sentence structure and analyze markets, and just a bunch of stuff that I think is very fun. But I also think that, just like you said, Zack, if you talk too much about that stuff, not only do you get the same kind of dopamine rush as if you've accomplished something, but you also signal to readers and fans, hey, I'm not for you. I'm writing for other writers. And that's kind of an issue that I think largely Christian fantastical worlds have now overcome, which I'm very glad to see. And hopefully I managed to play a part in that. But then kind of counterintuitively now for me, I realize there is still a need for author training from a uniquely Christian vantage to help those who are fans, but also maybe want to do some writing out there, find happiness in that pursuit, even if they don't want to be published, even if they're just writing for their own joy. I think this is something that is likelier for fantastical genre fans to do than fans of other genres. And so I see a great need then to foreground that joy in the callings that God has given us. Of course, now also I feel a little bit more qualified to talk about that as a published author of more than one book in at least 2 different genres. And as you mentioned, Zach, you've got some updates about your pre-publication journey. And that's part of our big discussion about this launch of the Lorehaven Authorship, a resource for aspiring writers that is sponsor supported. So it's a little different from all the free stuff we do at Lorehaven, but I'll be talking about that more a little later in this episode.
Yeah, and this episode might not be for you, dear listener. This might be for your friend who's trying to write a book. It might be for a cousin, a relative, a classmate, a coworker, a parent, a child, whoever. My daughter's case, my middle daughter, she has a friend who's newly her writing buddy, and they've formed this little writers group that meets at our house with other teenage girls who are all writing. And I actually just found out they're also listening to this podcast. So welcome, young ladies. But that might be the kind of thing. You might have a friend like that that's trying to write a book. And you're like, oh yeah, so-and-so told me about this dragons book she's writing. Oh, well, maybe they would like to hear about not only this episode, but the new authorship program.
Absolutely. Meanwhile, however, at lorehaven.com, we do have resources for fans and families for the purpose of finding these books. And we also have articles occasionally like the one I just kind of edited actually from the past and published at lorehaven.com. Discern the top 3 negative evangelical myths about popular culture. My first book was The Pop Culture Parent, and it's still an issue that relates to how Christians engage with fantastical stories, not just the Christian-made ones, but the ones that we find out in the world from maybe our non-Christian neighbors. So go check that one out. We also have a new review from Sierra Simopoulos, Gabriel's Song, a new fantasy from a debut author. You can find that at least this week on the homepage. Anything else, by the way, if it's gone from the homepage by the time you stop by, almost always you can put in 2, maybe 3 words in that search box on the menu on your mobile device or at the upper right corner if you're using the old desktop like I do, and then you can find it there. Subscribe free as well to get updates. And after January 2, subscribing free at Lorehaven will be the only way you can join the Lorehaven Guild. Now, just to get this foundation here, the Guild is a fan-centered free resource. We host that on Discord, and we do monthly book quests and fun discussions about reading and the joys thereof. But now within the Guild, as I'll mention later, we do have this new wing called the Authorship. And the Authorship is sponsor supported. Because if folks are going to put some time and energy into the craft and discipline of writing, then we do want to make sure to reward the pro novelists that we have in there, providing tips about how it's done and maybe even how to get published. And we won't necessarily try to sell your own dream back to you and say, well, here's, 10 short tips to become an amazing dystopian author with tens of thousands of fans and 3 easy lessons. Like, we're not going to do that sort of thing. I've always been kind of allergic to that sort of thing, but we'll explain in a little bit what we are going to do, but not before our top sponsor, which is audio-epic.com with their 1232 podcast. That's presented by Oasis Family Media. 1232, an exciting binge-worthy audio epic. It's from creators Callie Sue and Cheyenne Landry of Rumble Stump Entertainment. This is a faith in action audio adventure for all ages. When the experimental research of a physicist goes awry, his estranged twin children follow him through time to medieval Wales in the year 1232 AD, where they come face to face with a brutal world filled with superstition and legends. Along the way, they meet a penniless leader, a dark sorceress, and a warrior priest who provoke the twins into confronting the truth about themselves, each other, and Jesus Christ. Season 1 of 1232 is now available wherever you get your podcasts or audiobooks. Start listening today to 1232 and visit audio-epic.com to begin the adventure. That's audio-epic.com. Chapter 1 now. That last premise sounded quite imaginative, and I know for a fact that everyone who's ever sat down to create a short story, a fan fiction, or maybe even a novel you'd like to get in the hands of other readers someday, everyone, especially if you're a Christian, has wondered why. Why do I feel driven to do this? Why do I have this imagination? What is it for? Why am I not like the other girls? You can laugh at that a little bit, especially as you grow up and you discover that purpose on the earthly side of it. But I do want to not miss this very important biblical foundation for Christian fans who also want to write, why our author gives us imaginations. And I alluded earlier to the fact that we first need to approach this as fans of stories, as fans who are pursuing something greater than worldly success as a novelist. Although, don't hear me throwing shade on that. That would be wonderful too. God loves ambition, and he even rewards that. But I have noticed, at least in the early days of this, when I started getting involved in the mid 2000s, I noticed that a lot of writers writing blogs and websites and stuff, and then eventually some podcasts, they were falling into a trap that I started to call Ritticism. They seemed hyper-focused on talking about the craft and industry of writing and agents and sentence structure, and maybe complaining about publishers, Christian publishers in particular, who didn't seem as interested in publishing fantasy and sci-fi and much less interested in publishing horror and paranormal. However, these blogs, one of which I was involved with, did get some results. There were a few Christian publishers, even after Frank Peretti and the Left Behind series, who did try some of these books, but frankly, only a few of them succeeded. And it just kind of goes to show that even now, with a lot of progress being made, this is a rough territory. And if you are trying to create a story that is fantasy, or really any kind of story, but mostly fantasy, there's still some uncertainty among Christian readers about that. And so you're going to need to know the purpose of your imagination apart from whether or not an agent or publisher is interested, or whether or not this number of fans are interested. So back then, I think with the desire to find that purpose apart from earthly success, I've developed a take now over 25 years that, at least back then, not a lot of Christian writers were focusing as much on marketing to fans in particular, first as fans, and only then after that to talk about all the righty stuff. However, there is good news. I think in the last decade or so, Christian authors have gotten better at fan outreach. Just a few examples, Realm Makers, which started as a Christian Fantastical Writers Conference, has broadened that emphasis to also do this expo. And by the way, we just got the announcement, Zack, last Thursday, that the Realm Makers Expo this June back in St. Louis at the Union Station Hotel is going to have that expo available to the public for no charge. Like, you may need to pay to get into panel discussions and pre-screenings for movies and stuff, but you can come in there just as a member of the public to see these amazing stories. And that's fantastic. I think we'll have a great chance at marketing to fans who may also be interested in the writer side, but not necessarily. So we've gotten better at that. I've also seen more Christian writers get more serious about their faith in Jesus. Now, that doesn't mean that they're slapping John 3:16 all over everything. You can make if you're a cobbler, I think it's a Martin Luther quote, the cobbler glorifies Jesus by making a really good shoe, whether or not, he puts something Christian on it. It's still a Christian made shoe. And so we see authors who are Christians who are making stories get serious about their faith, even if they're not, sounding the bell about it. Now, obviously, Zack, we sound the bell a little bit more because, somebody's got to do it. Like, I don't mind going overt. I'm comfortable in that space, but others are not. And either way, it depends on who your audience is. If you're a Christian writing more directly about Christian stuff, I think you're going to mostly appeal to Christian readers, and they want to know out loud, hey, is this person a Christian? Like, whether or not they're from another denomination, like, do we share faith? Do we share ethical guidelines? And thereby the authors and the readers build trust with one another. I think Andrew Peterson is a great example of this. As a musician, he was able to go into more overt thematic spaces and even church spaces, performing his music. And I think that, plus his clear equal gifting in the field of fantasy creation, garnered him a lot of trust with Christian readers and even non-Christians who like where he's coming from. It's a Mormon-owned streaming service now, Angel Studios, that is distributing the Wingfeather Saga animated series and giving them complete creative control. So good neighbors there. And either way, it's very clear that Andrew Peterson is very serious about his faith, even when he's just singing about, non-clearly gospel songs, or where he's ending the song with a question rather than the answer. That's one way I think that Christian writers have beat the Riticism trap. And I think that's what the authorship will help us do.
Well, Stephen, I don't know about you, but my Christian-made shoes all have John 3:16 printed on the inside. So that's how I know.
Hey, even if they're falling apart, it's still a good Christian shoe, and you can't criticize the cobbler there.
Yeah, but I need to make a confession here. And sorry if this hurts anyone's feelings, but I am subscribed to a lot of author newsletters. And you know how many of those I skim or don't even read because they're about writing updates every time?
Oh,
quite a few. Sorry, everyone, but I just kind of find that boring. Now, with a few close friends, people I know in person, actually, I do want to read those because we talk regularly about our writing in a local writers group. So that's fine. But outside of that, outside of you, Stephen, and a few other people here where I live, I'm just simply not interested in that at all. And it's rare that I get an author newsletter that I get excited about and want to send to other people, much less just read the whole way through. There's a few people that do this really well, and they just have interesting stories. I'm going to give a positive shout out here to Carey Neitz. He always has some funny, interesting story, and not just about things related to his book, but things from before he was a science fiction author, because he worked for a software development company. And recently he talked about a very brief connection he tried to make with Scott Adams, the creator of Dilbert, who tragically just passed away. And I find those kinds of things interesting, those personal stories. Oh, I'm at 58% of my second draft of the third book in the series. Like, I mean, I'm sorry. I don't have time for an email. Now, if you want to put that on your website, that's great. I actually think an author website is perfect for that. Brandon Sanderson does this really well. He has several different book progress trackers. But the whole trend of this is sort of that Riticism. It's writers talking to writers about writing, not realizing that you want readers to actually read your newsletters. And I think this is because I've grown up in the mid 2000s, in the early days of the blogosphere, when too many blog posts started off with, "Sorry, I haven't blogged in a while."
Zack, I've never had updates like that on my own author website for that reason. And me too. I don't mean to be unkind, but it might be a little free marketing tip for you that I don't think readers find those very interesting. Maybe just one of those little busy work things that authors do when maybe they could have added another 200 words to that manuscript. But all of that warm up aside, that's kind of my explanation for why we're doing the authorship kind of more partitioned from what Lorehaven does. You won't see a lot of updates about the authorship because it's more of a secret clubhouse, member supported within the guild. You can't even get there unless you join the Lorehaven Guild, which is entirely fan focused. And yet what we have noticed is a lot of fans of this genre seem to like to enjoy writing in this genre, even if they're not trying to get published in this genre.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that, Stephen. So I grew up with a bunch of some really creative friends, and I'm thinking particularly of Jason and David, if they ever listen to this. Not only did we love reading fantasy books, we were trying to create them. David was more of an artist, and so he would have been a fantastic book cover designer if I had actually completed a book back then in high school. Jason was actually trying to create a comic book series. But the three of us together, we loved coming up with these kinds of things. And I think it just flowed naturally out of this genre that is so imaginative, and it is so speculative, and you can't help but wonder. And so it just, by kicking that imagination into high gear, I think it does kind of cause readers to want to see their own stories come to life.
And I think that is unique to fantasy and sci-fi, Zack, because just anecdotally, I haven't seen a whole lot of people who love biographies try to write biographies. And you don't see that as much with fans of genres like mystery or historical romance. I think it happens some, but maybe it's just a way that fantastical fans are wired, that they want to write fan fiction or draw maps or do fan art, things like that, just for fun. It doesn't mean that they are trying to get published or anything like that. Others maybe also share their short stories or poems or such with friends or family. And then from there, though, you do get other writers who have aspirations for indie or traditional publication. The one thing that we want to do in the authorship is apply and appeal to any kind of fan who also wants to write and to get good at it and to find, I think this is the most important goal of the authorship, to find happiness in that pursuit. Because as I've mentioned earlier, it is rough out there. So if you are trying to get published, you don't want to invest your happiness in the response of a publisher or an agent or even a fan or reader. Whatever the response is, you want to put your hope for happiness in something that's more important. And before I even talk about the obvious answer to that, which is Jesus Christ, I will say that even authors who don't know Jesus at least give the impression that they have an overflow of happiness to give with readers. They're not looking for happiness from readers. They come across as hyper competent, super duper highly achieved people. They come across as happy, and maybe they have a really miserable life and we don't see it. But the point is there, kind of tying in the marketing and the happiness topics there, they have the appearance of achievement and an overflow of happiness. And so that draws readers. Well, I think that as Christians, we really can't fake it. I mean, I know there's a little bit of performance, even getting dressed up for Sunday morning if you do. And sometimes you put something on and then you become that kind of thing, starting with, Jesus Christ himself. We're encouraged in the epistle to put him on in a sense. But I think that we need to start with a place of honesty. And in order to have an overflow of happiness to love and serve other readers, we need to know the source of that happiness, the joy/happiness. And I do equate the two for biblical reasons. That can only be found in Jesus Christ, which starts, by the way, with that purpose of why he's given us imagination in the first place. I don't want to try to find that purpose anywhere else.
Stephen, I like that you are starting with this idea of finding joy in Jesus. So how does creating a fantastical story actually cause that?
Well, the answer's in the Bible, of course, and also C.S. Lewis, who's not the Bible, but who had a lot of wisdom, especially when it comes to Christian creativity. And Lewis points back to, I think, a vast heritage of teaching in the scripture, starting with why God created the world. If we're going to ask, well, why do we create worlds? It makes sense to ask, well, why did God create one? God himself was fully happy. He was satisfied. It's great joy being God. I can only imagine. You're just omni everything. But there was such an overflow of love and happiness and satisfaction and order in being God that theologians have observed. I guess that's why God created a world. He wanted to share this. And other theologians, I think, rightly refer to this as God's glory, his attributes, his absolute goodness, his truth and goodness and beauty, spilling over, shining out, being reflected back from other things, or in the case of human beings, other people. And so really that pursuit of writing is about that happiness and reflecting it back to Jesus. And therefore we find satisfaction. You can see a little John Piper coming through here as well. It's implicit in the Bible. I can't give you a specific verse for that, but it's very clear that God is satisfied with being God. And yet his act of creativity just can't help wanting to share that with others. It doesn't take anything from God, though, to create a world. Like, obviously, Jesus surrendered his life and all that, but altogether, God is so full of glory that he wants to share more of it. And our response to his glory, reflecting that back, could be called worship. And of course, obviously, some people think worship mainly is the thing you do in church when you're singing, but it also includes listening to the sermon or planning to sign up for the potluck afterwards. And it includes any kind of godly creativity. We are now reflecting God back to him, even as images of God, when we make stuff using his stuff. It's for his glory, yes, but also for our happiness. Really, same thing. As God gets glorified, we get happier. And yes, we got to fight sin along the way, and we're living in a groaning, corrupted world, and there's all that stuff to deal with. That's why it takes practice. But I think we can still get hints of that joy today in all the ministry and worship that we're doing, practicing for that life of eternal joy. And this pursuit is our chief end. I love bringing up that idea of what is the chief end of man, and like man's chief end is to glorify God and enjoy him forever. I think fantastical stories and any good creativity helps us do that. And we can therefore find happiness in getting good at doing that before we even talk about those craft or industry challenges like plotting versus pantsing, or whether or not we are looking for an agent versus going out and trying to publish something ourselves.
Colossians 3:23 says, whatever you do, do it for the glory of God. And grounding our creative pursuits in God's glory is so crucial. It's so much of a superior motivation than seeking an award, seeking fame, trying to have a fan club, trying to make a lot of money. Well, hopefully you're not ever doing writing for that. But for any kind of human earthly reason, those really pale in comparison to seeking the joy and the glory of God, because that's the only thing that's going to empower you over the long haul. I have seen many a writer burn out, and I've seen even Christian writers burn out, and even some walk away from the faith. And I think it's because there was a wrong primary goal in mind. And it might not even be a bad goal. Like, I'm going to reach the unreached with this book. Hey, that is a great goal, not your primary goal. Because it's really just one little twist of the knob different than I'm going to write this book to get approval from other people. And once you fall into the approval trap, I'm sorry, the writing is just going to be terrible, and it's dangerous for your soul, because the chasing the approval idol is already dangerous on like a small scale, but trying to become an author to be getting approval from people, super duper dangerous, because now you have tons of people who are then controlling your mind, and it starts to bend your values. So yes, this has to start with finding joy in Jesus. So, Stephen, how will the Lorehaven authorship specifically help writers find that joy?
Well, the authorship will give those who sponsor it a support group. Yes, we'll have published prose in there. Myself and others who will be talking about it. Here's what it's like. I mean, not at the top, but here's what it's like a little further along the journey. Here's what we've discovered works for the craft. And we do want to hit on all those practical things, but not at the expense of the purpose. Zach, I love what you said there about whose approval are you pursuing. And I noticed you didn't say, well, you should be seeking God's approval. A gospel perspective would say you already have it if you've repented and put your trust in Jesus Christ, because when God looks at us, he doesn't see the flaws that we're still working on, with the Holy Spirit in us. He sees Jesus. He sees the righteousness and even glory of Jesus Christ now moving in. We're shining spiritually. Some places more than others, obviously. But that also motivates us to get better, oddly enough. Like, we're already great, thanks to Jesus, but also we're getting better. Like, that's the paradox that theologians call sanctification. That really starts with internalizing that purpose of why God created us and why we feel this drive to create other stuff. And I think some Christians maybe kind of already know that, or they intuit that, even if they can't talk about it. And maybe they do better. Maybe some have sought the approval of readers and publishers, and that seems to be working out for them. And burnout might be ahead. Don't run ahead too far. You might burn out. But what we're going to do is try to pursue that eternal fuel source. I'll talk in a little bit about how this has kept me going. Just this idea that, no, this is what I was created to do, no matter what anyone says, and whether or not I get published. I want to be happy doing this sort of thing. But if you sense the need, faithful listener, to know this greater godly mission, we'll invite you aboard. And let me give you a little info about how that works with the authorship. We have 3 levels of sponsorships, and it's easiest to get in with that sponsorship level number 1. That's the creative level, and it is $3.99 a month. Discord takes a cut. but the rest of it goes directly to support the good work of Lorehaven and little extra work to keep that authorship going too. With the creative level, you get to fight for your calling and enjoy live streams with the pros and discover why God created us to make stories for his glory and our joy. That also gets you access to a bunch of awesome channels we've already been running in the guild. You have access, of course, to the free side, which is the fan side. But for that creative side, this may be a great way to get you started. We'll move on and talk about the other benefits of the authorship and a little more about that. But first, we have our second sponsor, Tully Cole. The Case of the Heart Stone is that book. And we have a lot of gratitude, too, to the sponsors of this podcast and at lorehaven.com because it helps pay the bills and helps us expand into things like the authorship. But here is this book, Wacky Whimsy, Daring Adventures, Christian Values. The Nancy and Wilbur series, the ongoing tale of an unusual dragon and a unique boy, has it all. In The Case of the Heart Stone, a trip to the bridge market shoves Nancy and Wilbur headlong into a mystery. An irreplaceable treasure has been stolen from their good friend, Mr. Nathaniel Warty Troll. Will Nancy and Wilbur be able to uncover the truth behind the theft before it is too late? The game is afoot. Written by Tully Cole and illustrated by Lauren Austin, The Case of the Heartstone is the third book in the middle grade Nancy and Wilbur series. All three books in the middle grade fantasy series can be discovered on Amazon. You can also see that whimsical cover and more info for this and all the other sponsors in the show notes at episode 296 at lorehaven.com. Wow, Zach, we're already 4 episodes away from that big 300. Good time to be trying some new stuff. All right. Chapter 2, How We Grow His Gifts into Writing Skills. So we're not just sitting around debating about how much of God's glory can dance on the head of a pin and feeling really theological buzzes about that, right? We are going kinetic. We're putting that truth into action. And in my case, I will say, and I think it's implicit, but I'm going to make it explicit. I will say that this biblical joy has kept me going over decades of people saying no or not yet, or yeah, that sounds great. I can't sell that. And specifically, I'm talking about Above the Circle of Earth. It's a rare example of science fiction with grown-up characters with clear Christian themes in a market of fantasy with teen characters and more subtle Christian themes. So it's like exactly the opposite of everything that's selling. Zack, you did see Josiah DeGraff, our friend, did share some info. Apparently, sci-fi for grown-ups is trending a little bit up. So that is interesting. Maybe it's a good time to be trying this now, maybe on the cusp of something, but who knows? Who knows?
It's because we're already living in a cyberpunk world.
Well, there you go. And people want to know how to reckon with that, maybe. So repeating the truth from earlier, yeah, God gives us creative imagination to glorify him and find everlasting joy starting today, but lasting forever. That means that this divine purpose empowers us for the creative challenges we're going to face, whether it's, I don't feel like writing, but I kind of want to, or bother, that agent just told me no all over again, different levels there. And yet I faced all of those. Zach, I've heard people though say that, wow, I've had, 25 and a half rejections. And I'll go, well, I haven't had that many, but probably because I've been very, very cautious and I've tried to be very targeted in who I ask. But still, it has been 25 years now. Basically 25 of minor wins and major losses, maybe major wins. I don't know. In which case, I guess we'll charge more for the authorship. Probably not. But this has been like a lot of struggles, family struggles, struggles with kids, struggles at the day job, So speaking more generally here, I think that knowing this will help keep us going, will help keep us not pursuing the approval of men, but knowing that we already have God's approval, we can keep going and find joy anyway. Even when the day job boss tells you, yeah, sorry, we need to lay you off. And even when that editor tells you, well, this project isn't right for us, so no, thank you. I think I've mentioned this before, although I guess we did start the podcast after I knew I was going to be a published nonfiction author, but I had to ask myself a lot of times, Zach, could I do this whole Lorehaven thing, this whole podcast thing as a fan, even if I never got published as a pro novelist? Could I still want to write like science fiction and maybe other genres just for the joy? Well, if it hadn't been for you and for other people encouraging me to keep at it, whether or not so-and-so said yes, yeah, I don't think I would still be doing that. So now seems the time to grow what we do at Lorehaven into the authorship to do the same for others.
And that makes sense. I was talking to a friend earlier today, even about the reason why so many of us seek traditional publishing. Let's just put our cards on the table here. Why is my book in submission? Why am I not indie publishing it when so many people indie publish? Well, in my own life, there are some logistical complications to that because of my day job. So getting a traditional publisher for me is just a lot simpler. But in general, I think why a lot of people seek traditional publishing is they want to know at least one other person believes in them and is willing to invest in their book. And it gives that social proof to other people. Hey, this is a book that a company has invested a lot of money in publishing. So I get it. I get that that's why. But I think the trap is to look at a publisher's approval as sort of a substitute for, is this book good? And you need to get good. Like, more than anything else, you need to write a great book. Because look, the honest truth here is that sometimes good books go undiscovered, and it might take them a while to get discovered. Not all good books get a publishing deal. And quite frankly, a lot of books that don't deserve it do get a publishing deal. So the publishing contract can't be the end of your writing career. It could be the means to having a good career, but it can't be the singular goal. Now, in my case, I have submitted this book once already and got turned down, but got some advice from this publisher. And I followed all of that advice and more and came back to him and said, could I resubmit this? And he said, absolutely. And we had a great talk about it. And so I took that as a challenge to improve my craft more than anything else. Like, I wanted to write a really good book. And with my own temperament, I kind of, and this I think is true of a lot of authors, I struggle between like the self-doubt and like the aggrandizement of like, this is the best book ever. This is the worst book ever. And so I more so just wanted like an outside opinion. And again, with a publisher, you're getting someone who's going to invest money in this. They're not just like trying to pat you on the head. So for me, the challenge of getting a book contract was subservient to writing the best book I possibly could. And so, as you said earlier, Stephen, we really can't fake it. We live in a world where people are extremely discerning of bad books, right? So there's entire YouTube channels and whatnot devoted to this. You can't just get by because you put John 3:16 under the cover. So, Stephen, how is the authorship going to help writers grow in their craft?
Well, it starts at least with my experience, but it doesn't end there. I do have 25 years of experience knowing the Christian fantastical market and knowing a little something now about traditional publishing. As for other skills like indie publishing, well, eventually I'll know, but I also have friends who know, so they're going to be coming in too. But even if it were just me, which it won't be, but I've got 25 plus years of creative struggles that I think can help other writers grow their craft. That reflects our shared need for training. So that really starts just with that discussion space for people of different skill levels to join up with that foundation of wanting to glorify God for our good and our joy, and just worshiping God through our creativity. And knowing that we can't just go from, yay, writing, like you said, that kind of the rah, 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 well, for one thing, that's not going to last, But some Christians, I think, may go by instinct from, yay, let's write, to let's change the world, Don't miss that step in between. You got to get good. Like you said, Zach, you've got to learn first by reading and research and knowing the market and reading widely in different genres and a bunch of tips like that. But also, it helps to get a nice live stream every once in a while from an author who knows what he or she is talking about. We already see plenty of those from other writers' groups, But I think we'll bring a different kind of flavor here. For example, I'm offering a live stream now. I think it's actually going to be to anybody who's in the guild, so not just people who are sponsoring, just to kind of demo the sorts of things that we'll be talking about in that live stream. And I think it's going to be Saturday, January the 31st at 6 p.m. Eastern, 3 Pacific. Yeah, exclusively in the guild. And I'm going to call it How to Sell a Sci-Fi Novel in Just 25 Easy Years. So stuff I haven't talked about before because I tend to be kind of private, and I've realized, okay, people are going to want to know the backstory about this. And I think by now they're especially going to want to know that backstory. But then future live streams we're going to do just for authorship members. And I think we've got a way to make that accessible and nimble because it's within the guild. So it's a bit easier access, especially with those who are familiar with Discord. And even apart from the live streams, we'll be doing posts and training and video clips and such in every room of the authorship. I've already got stuff in there about how C.S. Lewis had kind of this 3-stage view of story making. We've got a topic in there about the Christian label. Like Zack, we talked about that in our podcast about that. It was like one of our first, actually, if not the first. But now approaching that topic from more of the author side. And eventually we'll have topics in there about the more controversial questions like violence and sexual content, open door versus closed door versus leave it open a crack, sensuality in stories, good, bad, mixed. Can you put cuss words in there? That kind of thing. I mean, we talk about that as fans, but now we're going to talk about it as creatives. And in order to get our next feature, you're going to have to go up a tier to the pro novelist side, which gets you one other feature we'll talk about in just a moment. You get all the benefits for creative members, plus your own booth. We're going to have us a book festival, a virtual book festival, always on in there, where those who subscribe at this level, so it's monthly, so you could subscribe for a month and then drop out and then come back when you got something new to share. Or if you're really ambitious, keep that booth open and start recruiting people who may want to beta read your manuscript, or maybe join your street team and announce things, or maybe get early copies. Think of it as an extension of your social media, but going directly to readers. Because in the book festival, we take advantage of that idea that Lorehaven has spent years connecting authors, not just with other authors, but with faithful readers. And by the way, the book festival will be open to everybody in the guild. I almost think we kind of predicted the whole Realm Makers idea is like, yes, the writers have to pay to go to Realm Makers and set up a booth or go to classes. But if you're not a writer, you can just walk in and look at the books in the booths. And if you want to take a class, you may need to pay extra. But it's kind of very similar here. The booth spaces will be hosted only by those who sponsor at the pro novelist level. And then within certain parameters, you can do whatever you want with your virtual booth.
And I think the book festival is probably going to be the most fun aspect of this because it's always my favorite part of Realm Makers, if I'm being honest. I just love any kind of bookstore. I'm addicted to them. They are my casino in a sense, but I love to go around the Realm Makers bookstore and all the booths at the expo and just look, first of all, just look at the vast number of books that there are. Because 10 years ago, I didn't think any of this existed. And I know a lot of writers today that are just getting started and they're like, where can I find Christian fiction books? And especially Christian fantasy or sci-fi. In fact, just last night, I was at an event at my church for creatives, for musicians, artists, photographers, videographers, writers, all kinds of people. And I met 2 people that are starting to write Christian fantasy. And I don't know how aware they are of this space, but it's a harder space to make sense of at the beginning because there's a very small section at Barnes & Noble, which is one of the only remaining bookstores that has Christian fiction, even smaller at like half price of books or something. And we don't have Borders. We don't have Lifeway. Some cities still have Mardells, but these are just not as prevalent. And when you go online and you just type in, you get a bazillion options. And who knows if any of them are even written by Christian authors or if it's just a Christian idea. Someone just copied something from Revelation. But going to the Realm Makers bookstore, going to our Lorehaven Book Festival, it's where you can actually interact with people. And that's what's so great about it. It's not just like, oh, here's some books for sale. It's like, here are the people that are creating these books that you get to talk to. And it's one of the it's one of the undersold aspects of the Realm Makers Conference. And I think it's going to be one of the best things of our Discord server, because we all love books, right? Whether we're readers or writers, we all love talking about books. And so this is where we get to talk to one another.
So for this idea, I have to credit, I forget which member it was, but it was someone who signed up early as a supporter, as a member then of one of these membership tiers in our Discord server, because I announced this a few weeks ago in the server itself, and then asked for ideas and asked, hey, what would people like to see? And someone suggested something like this, and I thought, that is so brilliant. I wish I'd thought of it. Because I too, Zach, I was loving being a vendor, even just talking about Lorehaven, even before I had a science fiction novel to talk about and maybe sell you. So I've become more acquainted with this space, and I see a great need for the virtual version of that space, which also, by the way, gives our authors in the guild a way to talk about their stuff, because we have had in the Code of Honor a guideline of, hey, please don't come here just to sell your stuff. Let another's lips praise you. Authors, people will ask you questions, in which case it's fine. But this virtual booth now gives them a platform, an extension of their own social media, but with always on content, depending on how long they keep that booth open, with folks who are going to see your notifications and aren't going to have them mixed in with politics and AI slop and things like that. You're going directly to human beings, your stories made by humans for humans, from that virtual booth. By the way, I have my own virtual booth already open, or at least the beta test version of it, to talk about in part Above the Circle of Earth, which is my science fiction novel, launched last spring from Enclave Publishing. The fight for the space mission begins in his home world. Brock and Alicia Rivers return with their family from exile on Mars to launch the first missionary space mission and fight the secular regime. That's the short description, but there's a little more to it in this story for grown-ups, but is teen-friendly as well. That is now available in all systems, hardcover and digital, and fantastic audiobook. You can learn more about Above the Circle of Earth by joining the space mission at estephenburnett.com. That's my own portal, and you can see the purchase links there right on top. Do sign up for those updates, because I'll have a lot more to say within the coming months about that. And if you are in the Lorehaven Guild, you can also stop by my virtual booth. It should be all public by the time this episode comes out. And by the way, you can also see a fuller article about the authorship and its purposes, also available just within a few days of this episode dropping, all at lorehaven.com. Chapter 3, and this is a special shout out that I've been encouraged to make for listeners of this podcast and those familiar with Lorehaven or any of our other allies who may not be a writer. Maybe that doesn't really appeal to you. It's not something you do. You just love these books, but maybe you're interested in the state of the Christian fantastical world and how we can grow. We actually have a special sponsor tier for you folks, especially if you've been blessed with resources and you feel you want to give to this mission. And maybe you, like Zack and me personally, would also like to see some upgrades to the Christian fantastical world, in particular, more and more excellently written entries in the fields of science fiction and horror. I mentioned a couple of episodes ago from my solo show that right now, teen and YA fantasy, mostly for women or female readers, is the undisputed champion of this world. It is the queen, it is the princess, and her handmaiden is time travel romance. And that is okay. We want to see all of these stories succeed. But for those who maybe have ideas in other genres, it may feel very frustrating. Well, that's where the encouraging part comes in, right, Zack? Like, we've got to love and serve our readers and not come at them with lectures about how they ought to be reading something different. I foresee a day when all these subgenres within the fantastical genre live in harmony and success. But I will say it is not yet this day. And that's where Lorehaven comes in with maybe a purpose of cultivating reader tastes. And in order to do that, we need time and overhead. We want to do more reviews. We want to do more book quests. We want to put the book quests out in public and not have them be scattered throughout the threads in the guild. Just so we want to encourage these limited niche genres that may be niche today, but maybe the popular genres of tomorrow. I'd love to be on the cutting edge of promoting those. And in order to do that, frankly, we would love some help from your generous donations.
And speaking of those kind of frontier genres or stories, I think that's what's so fun about all of this, first of all. We do have to acknowledge, look, Christian fantasy has been around for hundreds of years. It's been around since the Fairy Queen, which is a previous sponsor. It's been around since, Pilgrim's Progress. It's been around a long time, and especially from Tolkien and Lewis from the last century. But at the same time, we are going into a lot of uncharted territory with some of our stories and genres and genre mashups. And that's part of what it means to be a writer. It means you're leading the way for other people. You're a leader and others are following. And that can be taxing. It can be lonely. It can be scary. And so that's another function of the Lorehaven authorship, is to kind of give us that place to find that camaraderie as we lead and as we guide and as we explore, because it can have a lot of challenges. So, Stephen, why don't let's talk more about the terraformer level. Like, what is this term? Like, what do we mean by this? What is this terraformer level?
So I've been surprised at how much people resonate with this term. I think I've just kind of casually dropped it in conversations, and even folks who are not sci-fi fans are intrigued by it. But Zack, you and I actually talked about this back in episode 49. How can we terraform the church to enjoy fantastic fiction? And so I kind of want to build on that and offer this tier of membership to those who may be right, but also feel free and have the resources to chip in a little bit more to help Lorehaven, and therefore all of these kinds of stories grow. So the Terraformer level is $29.99 a month, where you get all the benefits I mentioned earlier, plus more perks. And above all, you really help invest in the future of fantastical fiction and expand the Lorehaven mission. Like I said, we want to have more resources, free resources for fans and families to find what they maybe didn't even know they needed. More time to put in more library titles, and the time to recruit reviewers and edit them. I would love to do 2 reviews a week. Right now, we're doing 1 review a week. I'd love to double that if we had the resources. I also really want to do, once we hit a certain tier there, digitally published book quests. I'd love to get together the content that we've written for these book quests. I think it goes back now about 4 or 5 years each month in the guild. We haven't missed one yet. Many faithful folks putting together reader questions. I'd love to edit those up and then just make those available for free download for folks. Since I thought of that idea, I've seen a lot of people asking for stuff like that. So I realized, okay, there is a need. But this is a generational project, I think. Other genres took their time, decades sometimes, to get popular. And so I foresee the need for Lorehaven to have a role in encouraging the Christian-made fantastical genres also to get popular. And that's why we refer to terraforming, because you are turning a dead world into a living one over the space of centuries using speculative technology. And for those who are blessed with success, maybe they're authors, pro authors who feel that, hey, I got $30 a month and I can pitch it toward what they're doing. I like what they're doing. Then yeah, go in and sign up and you'll get access to all that stuff. Whether or not you want to use it, you'll be helping to support writers. You'll be a terraformer of the authorship. And of course, we want you first to support your family and local church and faithful groups. Absolutely, those come first. First things first there. But know also that, hey, you might be giving towards more episodes of this podcast. Zack and I are doing this in our evenings and weekends largely, and we've got to make sure that we're taking care of our folks and stewarding our time. And right now, our main limitation really isn't even the money or time. Or the money or willingness. It's just the time. It really is, at least for my part. Either way, Lorehaven is a sponsor-supported mission. You've heard some of the sponsors in this very episode, and we're grateful to those folks who help keep everything running. The space that we use to record this and the web hosting and all of that. I mean, those guys want money too. And by the way, they keep jacking up the prices because I think they're going to transform everything with AI. Well, we want to stay human-focused here. humans sponsoring other humans to make these amazing stories for their own happiness, for the glory of God, in order to get good and reach readers, and also ultimately change the world with the Lorehaven Authorship and Lorehaven.com.
Well, to you, our listener, we want to know, if you are a writer, which groups and mentors have helped you grow? What has sustained you on your writing journey? So send us a note about that to podcast@lorehaven.com or tag us on social media with your comment. And right now we want to go to a comment from our YouTube page. This was left on episode 219, which is where we interviewed Todd Bustede from Gap Digital about the Left Behind audio drama series. And this comment is from John, who says, quote, "I am forever grateful to these people for putting this wonderful drama together. I won't spoil it much here, but there is a part in Glorious Appearing that had me convicted of my sin and my need for a savior several years ago. And as a result, I was converted to Christianity, a follower of Jesus Christ. God saved me, and I did not do anything to earn it. It is all his doing." Unquote. Man, that is such a fun story to hear. And that's so cool that, John, that you got to the end of the series and then realized, I need to become a follower of Jesus Christ. When we interviewed Jerry Jenkins, we heard a story of someone who read the first book and became a believer and was like, wow, I really need Jesus. But that's so cool that you got all the way through the series, and it Glorious Appearing, you're like, I want to be there to Jesus' right hand. I was just listening to that part where he separates people to his right and left hand, and those who will be with him and those who will say, I never knew you. So I'm glad you know him, John. I hope that other people who are reading or have read this series will also know Jesus personally.
You know, when I first read this comment, I thought it was about last week's episode, which was a retrospective on mainly Left Behind Book 1, in addition to those episodes we did in summer of 2024. So obviously other people are still thinking about this series and the audio drama that's faithfully based on it. With you, Zack, and the angels in heaven, presumably, I rejoice in the salvation of this person who made it through 11 volumes, and then only in book 12 did the Holy Spirit decide to crack through and transform that dead heart. So sometimes the Holy Spirit is mad patient, even though it was pretty clear, that gospel presentation in those first 11 books. And that's a bit of a gentle rebuke to some sneering critics I used to say back in the 90s or early hundreds. Why are they doing 12 volumes? It's just a cash grab. It's like, well, in addition to having a lot of ground to cover in the tribulation, and which wouldn't have worked with a smaller series, it seems that it required 12 books and a lot of time and some spiritual terraforming in order to convert this one soul. So thanks so much for that comment there, John. Next on Fantastical Truth, imagine, if you will, that Christian author X creates a futuristic tale in which cyborg detectives explore the boundaries of good and evil. That's a free one for you, Zack. That seems cool. But how does that compare with, say, a Christian author Y's fantasy story in which verses and prayer work like magic, people and place names are anagrams for moral virtues, and the king represents, you guessed it, Jesus Christ? Well, many fine Christians get confused by stories like that of author X, but they get really impressed by stories like that of author Y, because after all, author Y did something that author X didn't do. Allegory. Allegory is awesome, right? Well, sometimes, but is this kind of allegory really make for a more Christian story? We'll talk about that next week, and whether or not your story has allegory. And by the way, I think it's great if it gets in there by incident. I want to give a special shout out to all of the fans out there who do want to make stories for the glory of God, for your own happiness, maybe to reach other readers, maybe even change the world. Either way, we hope you'll join us in the authorship. But even if you don't, we hope that you will keep his glory and your happiness in mind as you go, therefore, into your creative journey. Always stay a fan first, a reader first, but also make stories for the glory of Jesus as we continue to seek and find his fantastical truth.